Lena Black Gemara. Today is Daf Monday. Erev Rosh Hashanah is Daf Tes. We will learn today Daf Tes and Daf Yud for the Rosh Hashanah as well. We'll just pause for a few seconds in between. We're up to the Gemara here. At the bottom of the page of Zion on the base, and we're going through. The Mishnah said that there are two kabbalas that are exception. That if you shechted it, shaloi lishmoi, not having the right carbon in mind, the carbon actually becomes possible. All other kabbalas we say continue bringing it up, but the owner has to bring, fulfill his promise to bring another carbon. But chatzos, carbon pesach bismane, in the time between chatzos and nighttime, if you had the wrong carbon in mind, it's possible the whole carbon. So now we're going to find out, how do we know that? And bearing in mind, the rule is by karbonos. Shana olav hakasav la'akev, which means different than other places. If the trader tells you to do something, it's only lechatchila. If the trader wants to say that this is even b'di'evet, it's the only way that's going to be kosher, then the trader has to repeat itself somewhere. Says the Gemara, 2 lines from the bottom of Zion Beis. Chatas min al hayno chatas. Apostle, see what it says. V'shochat oisolich chatas. Says you should shecht it to lich chatas for a carbon chatas. So we learn out from there that shetehei shchita lishem chatas. When you shecht it, the carbon it has to be for the sake of a chatas. So you should place your hand on the head of the chatas and you should shecht it for a chatas. The same place you shecht the oil. Okay. Remember, there are 4 principal avodas. There's shchita, there is kabbalah, receiving the blood, then there's the halacha, transporting the blood, and then there's the zika, which is the zika is the avodah mainly for the bailim. That's where his kapara is, the owner. So kabbalah, the same thing. See what it says: the lokach hakoyin midam hachatas. You should take the blood with dam hachat. Why spell out chatas again? To tell you that when you're taking the blood, have in mind that this is a chatas. Should take kabbalah the same chatas. We don't need a special pasuk for halacha because every kabbalah, and what do you do with the blood? You got to bring it to the mizbech. So every kabbalah automatically includes halacha. The ashkechan. So what do you know from here so far? Shchita, by chatas, kabbalah, zrika. They all have to be done for the sake of chatas. How do you know when you sprinkle the blood, it has to be done l'shem chatas? It says in pasuk that you should bring your carbon, you should bring your asham point, you should bring your chatas, and then it says there, the olav hakoyin mechatos. The koyin will forgive him for mechatas. So why is it spelled mechatos? Shetehei kapara l'shem chatas. And where does the kapara take place for the owner? The kohen is one who's doing all the activities to it. Is the zrika? That's the kapara of balabas, and it has to be for a chatas. Okay, so all we know here is this. Remember, there's 2 kinds of psulim. You had the wrong carbon in mind, or you had the wrong person in mind. So here we know. Shinui Kodesh, you had the wrong carbon in mind as possible. Also, we only know it once, so it's only a mitzvah. The chatzil, it has to be done correctly. We don't know yet that it's possible it's ma'akiv. So first thing, when I wants to go through Ashkelon Shinui Kodesh, Shinui Bailam, and Haino Shinui Bailam as well, if you change the person is making it for, on Makra, it says in that very same pasuk. So first we dash in v'chipar olav hakoyin mechatosay. We stress the word chatosay, but also we already had before. It says olav. Allah, that you have to have the right person in mind. And chaveira, we also learn out someone who, if you have in mind someone else doing a carbon which is similar to your carbon, then it powerful it. If the other person brings a totally different carbon, like an oiler, it doesn't in any way interfere. So Allah, so okay, what do we know from here? Ashkel and mitzvah. So we know from all this that you have to do the right thing. How do you know? Where's it written the second time that's ma'akiv? That Gemara could sure. It could have said mechatas. By saying chatas, we learned the drasha it has to be for sake of chatas. Why say the extra vav chatasoi? And we'll use it later by Nazar. We'll see what he dashes when the letter vav. So we'll use the same approach. Hachanami chatas chatasoi. Could have said mechatas. Said mechatasoi his thing is an extra, whereas it's written again, second time. Okay, so what do we know from here? Says the Gemara. What we know from here is mitzvah b'shinui kodesh. So we have psukim by shinui kodesh, one pasuk. What does one pasuk tell you? L'chatchila is how you should do it. But we don't have a second pasuk to tell you that b'di'evet is possible. And then, by zika we have 2 psukim. By zika we have b'chipar olav b'chatas, and then the next shabav. So it's like double. So we know it's makir. But what do we know by shinui bailim? All we know is a pasuk of zrika, because chipper, which stage of the avodas is the kapara? The zrika, the sprinkling. So we know uzrika b'shini bailim bein mitzvah lakiv. When it comes to zrika, there's a double chatas and chatasoi. So you have two questions. First of all, shini kodesh. How do you know that's makiv? And shini bailim. What about the three other avodas? I know b'chalt even possible. So. So how do you know all other avodas shina kodesh if you change the name? That it's ma'akiv ubeshar avodas b'shina bailim, and the other three avodas when it comes to changing the owner bein lemitzvah bein lakiv have no. I know it's awesome. Rabbi said, you're right. Ask, we learn out from mechatas nazir. We learn out from chatas nazir. See, it says by chatas nazir, the hikriv hakoyin lifnei Hashem, that the koyin should bring before Hashem, and it says va'osa es chatosoi. He said you should make your chatas and mesolosoi. All the activities. It says v'hikriv hakoyin va'osa. Also, which particular activity? All of them. So that's how you know it has to be lishma, and it's the second time. So therefore, the second time is ma'akiv. So Gemara said, fine. Ashkechon shinu kodesh. So you know from here, shinu kodesh, you change the name of the carbon. We have twice the two different psukim. That's the psukim. So therefore, it's ma'akiv. Oh, but shinu ba'alim, no. The other three activities are changing the owner. How do you know that's possible? But skip the branches. Amar Abuna says, one of the problems with kachim is because Allah is showing you to learn it is there are a lot of gesois. Zevachim is not so bad, even though we have problems. When we get to some of the other masechtas, like Chris and others, it's very difficult to learn because there's so many girsayos to work out what's the right girsa. It wasn't really learned through properly. Amar Rabbi Huna says, B'nei Yeshua, chatas chatasei. Rabbi Huna says, because it says in this pasuk, v'hikriv hakoyin, it says, could have said also chatas. Why is it chatasei? His chatas, his, and not somebody else's. So that's how you know shinui bailim for all the other activities. And then okay, so Gemara says, yeah. So Gemara Rabbi asked, and so how do you know it's ma'akiv? Because we didn't compare it to the carbons those total oil or shlamim. We compare it to shlamim, and like we had before, just like shlamim, they're all compared to each other lemitzvah. So too, when it comes to chat, they're all compared to each other la'akiv, because you already established that one of them, by zrika, shini bailim, is not only a mitzvah to have the right person, it's also ma'akiv. So once you know that one of them is ma'akiv, and you learn out that also all the other activities has to be done correctly, so then we equate that what? That just like shlamim, all of them are exactly the same, so too by the other kabbanas, all of them should be exactly the same. That's how Rashi lives. Those disagree. All of them have to be exactly the same. So therefore, since by zrika it's ma'akiv, all the avodah is ma'akiv as well. Maskal and Ravina makes a question. Let me answer. If you could dash in the vav in that pasuk that it says chatosoi, the es oilosoi. What do you do with the vav from oilosoi? If vav is a an Indian is a thing, what do you do with that vav? Let me answer. Oilosoi. My dasha could have said oilas. It says oilosoi. What do you dash over there? So you want to ask the question. Hifra Ravina already is going to make it be so pedantic and asks, what do you do with other vavs? Well, in the pasuk further, it says more. Ravina minchas. It could have said minchas. It says minchasoi. Could have said nesa. It says nischoi. Why is only asking from Eilasai? Why is asking from the next pasuk? Which talks about the other things that come with it. By Dosh, but why is only asking that? So that doesn't bother. You know why? He taka uses the Rasha. It says min chasam min iskayim. It says by the kabbanos of Sukkos that it says min chasam min iskayim. We darshan that their mincha and their nesachim can be brought anytime, even at night. A carbon can only be brought during the day, but it says min chasam without limiting it, even at night, even a day later, even 2 days later. You can bring the carbon mincha. You can bring the nesachim later, and so on. And that's what the Rebbe says. The basis is why we can say Krishma in the morning without putting on tefillin, because it says if you bring carbon without everything, without all the things, it's possible. But since by you can bring the nesachim 10 days later, we put on the tefillin later. So it's good enough. So the only thing that the Rebbe actually changed the minute if you Rebbe put into place. To put on tefillin, we say Krishma in the morning. So therefore, he uses when he uses the word where it says min chasoi. No matter when you bring it, it's still related to it as it's mincha. It's still related as it's nesach. He uses it, but my oilosoi. You're going to make a big deal out of the word chatosoi to teach you that you have to have the shini bailam as possible. So tell me, what are you going to do with oilosoi? So the Gemara, there's a lot of my dasha, but with dasha, that's question number one. But so, furthermore, Gomri Mahadodi, this passage is written by Nazir. How do you compare one chattas to another chattas? So what do you know? You see by Nazir that you have to have lishma. Maybe by Nazir you need lishma, and not by chattas chaylev. We always call a regular chattas is called chattas chaylev, because Rashi says the most common avera people ate was treif. Sorry? Yeah, chaylev. So therefore we call stam chattas is chattas chaylev. Chattas dam is much less, and other chattas are much less. So how can you learn?
That just because there were a lot of treifus that were geschochten, or would that just
Dam we know is miyas. Remember we had the Gemara dam that was miyas. Nobody eats dam. And other Vedas are like mamash and aveda. Eating is something you do every day, 3 times a day. So
the
they make mistakes. Exactly, they won't get the wrong. No, not lahachas. The whole thing is a shayik. Yeah. So about a chattas here. So the question, me gomri madodi chattas chem chattas nozer legomri. You can learn chattas chem chattas nozer. Why not? I can argue as follows. You know why by nozer we're so strict? You need lishma. Shken yeshim adam machedim. You bring a whole series of karbanos, not just one carbon. So chamer you have to be lishma. But chattas chem is just one carbon. Who said you need lishma? And generally speaking, neither can you learn nazir from chattas chelib. It has a separate chumrah. Chattas nezir chelib chumrah. She can't cut us. By nazir, there's no cutters involved. You know, but by chattas chelib, if you did b'meiz, you get cutters. If you ate chelib b'meiz, so you can't learn from each other. What are you learning? Elam Rabba. Actually, no, you're right. We don't learn from nazir. We learn from chattas mitzayda. What does it say by mitzayda? The chsiv, it says by mitzayda. The kohen has to make the chattas. So osar kohen learn that all asiyosef have to be lishma. So we can learn lishma by chattas from mitzayda. She calls it chattas. No, so all we know from there is ashka shina kodesh. Shina bailim and all. I know if you had the wrong person in mind. Or makra. It says in the same pasuk the chiper al hamitaheh Clark. The next word hamit who you mean mechaper? The one that needs a tara, the person of this carbon. So al matai is there, but al matai chaveira. Clear. So that's how you know shinei bailim, and then how you know la'akiv is you know that because Rashi says before from that pasuk zois have told loyla. You know that's like the second time you compare, and then okay, fine. So you about Kati, but also you can't compare to chayla. Remember that mitzvah there's no chorus involved. So Kati mi yalfa madodi chatel chayla machan chayla yav. You can't learn chatel chayla for the same reason. Sheken yesh imod dame machayla. There's a whole series of kabbanis, so maybe it's strictly you need lishma. And Chatzachev doesn't. Nor, generally speaking, nor Chatzas Mitzaydim with Chatzas Chayim, you can't equate the two. She can't cut us. So you're okay, you're right. So you have Nozah, you have Mitzaydim, and you have Chaylev. And we're trying to learn Chaylev that Shina Kodesh and Shina Bailim is a problem. Well, you can learn from each individual, but maybe collectively, if you combine Nozah and Mitzaydim together, the Tzad HaShava is that Shina Bailim and Shina Kodesh is the problem. Let's learn Chaylev from both of them. So you want to know which one shouldn't it say, and we'll say it's extra. Let it not say by Chaylev v'teise mahanach. Learn from those two. I'll tell you. They both have a chumrah in common that they need. It's a whole series of kabbanas. You can't learn Chaylev from them. Let it not say the dinim b'chatas nazir v'teise mahanach. Learn from Chaylev and from Mitzayda. Malahanach came on the Shaila. No, that's a big cooler. You can be mid Naziris, you can come to me and go to a Rav and be Mata Neder. Because remember, Naziris is a Neder. We did have a big machlekes in the Rishonim in the beginning of Dorni, whether Nazir is a Neder or a Dova, whatever. How do we understand Nazir? Is a Gavra or a Chepsa? But regardless, you can be shoyl on it. You can undo the whole, unravel the whole thing. You can't unravel Yeit. There's nothing you can do about it. You're a Mitzvah, you can't do anything about it. So there's a cooler by Nazir. So how can you learn Nazir from the other ones that they take on the Chumras? So don't write by mitzvah, but taste manach. Malan can aim by medalus. The other ones is a fixed carbon. I'm saying mitzvah is asham is a carbon oil of the depending how wealthy you are, which is a bit cooler. You can bring a carbon mincha, and that's good enough. So therefore, if you knew dinim in the other katais, you couldn't learn mitzvah from them. So therefore, how do you know? Ella amakra. It says in pasuk. We compare to shlamim. Ma shlamim bein shina kodesh bein shina bailim. By a carbon shlamim, you need both. Being in lishma on the mitzvah, at least by shlamim is l'chatchil, right? But the other we said that if you did like lishma, it's still a kosher animal, just not yaitza, but it's still kosher. So av chatas bein shina kodesh bein shina bailim being lishma le mitzvah. So we know at least you have a mitzvah there. Hilchach mitzvah mishlamim. And then Mahanach Kroy, all of these extra psukim that we had on the top of the page and so on, is la'akiv. Once you have an extra pasuk, we already know the basis. And the second one is being ma'akiv. Then we compare what? Just like Shlomo, they're all no different what Avodah is, so too no different what Avodah is. So what do we know here? Remember, there's another kind of a chatas oil v'yodet. So we know a chatas chaylev. The ksibo it says l'chatas. It says in the pasuk here that what that you should b'shachat oisel l'chatas. You have to have lishma. Aber chatas da avodah zarah. What about a chatas da avodah zarah, which is not written in the parsha, it's written in Shlach. When we had a whole before in Haiti, the chatas avodah zarah is totally different, a different carbon. And what about the chatas, which is oil of the shmiyas hakoil, the three avedas that you bring a carbon oil of the year, not a fixed animal, fixed carbon, but it depends on your wealth. Shmiyas hakoil. If you know Adis and you say I have no testimony to share, and then turn out to be a liar. Ubitus vasayim, you made a shvua, and you turn out to be, you swore false. Or tumas migdish v'kedusha of you, or tummy, you walked in the base of migdish, or you ate kodesh. These three, you bring a chatas oil of the year. How do you know over there is the like sibu? And how do you know? Can you learn it from Chatas Chaylev and say, just like here, you need Lishma, it's Ma'akev if he didn't, the same thing there? Says the Gemara, Chatas David is Gechavim, no question. Asim Chatas Chaylev is the same. Shekein Chorus Kemaisa. You need to be amazing, you get chorus. That's the same thing as Chatas Chaylev. But L'chayda, all the other ones, there's no chorus. If you swore false, there's no chorus. If you all these other ones, or you withhold testimony and you lie about it, you don't bring chorus. Now that we've established that Sai Chatas Chaylev and Sai Chatas Nazir and Sai Chatas Mitzvah, all three of them, you have to have Lishma. There's no particular, then the Tzad HaShavah is that all three of them is any Chatas needs Lishma. So therefore, even including, you don't need Kodesh because Nazir and Mitzvah have no Kodesh either. So and these other Chatos also require Lishma. They all require Lishma. Tana, but we learned Pesach. Okay, we finished with Chatas. Now we said by Pesach also, if you had the wrong thing in mind, it's possible. But here we gave a window. The window is the time that you could have brought it. It is, and you between Chatzos and dark at night. If you had the wrong carbon in mind, it passes. What happens if afterwards you had the? This is a very interesting din. At a Pesach, if you have the right carbon in mind, kosher. The wrong carbon in mind, possible. After that, if you have the right carbon in mind, it's possible. If you have the wrong carbon in mind, it's kosher. In other words, after the
shlomim, it'll be kosher.
We'll see later. Any carbon, you have in mind, any carbon is kosher. You have the wrong carbon, not kosher. If you have the right one, it's the wrong zman. It's possible. And we're going to ask now, how do we know that? Says the Gemara, talking about we learn Pesach bizman.
It's not shaykh to bring from Pesach, so you're not really bringing from Pesach.
The question is, for example, you can still bring a Pesach Shein. So it's still the zman.
Say until Pesach Shem.
Well, Pesach Sheni, you can still bring this very carbon.
On Pesach Sheni.
Yeah, but let's say the second day of Pesach, you have the wrong carbon in mind. It's still shaykh to Pesach. What about Erev Pesach in the morning? We have one Tana who says in the morning same thing applies, but the Chacham disagree, and they hold, or the day before that, according to everybody, it's possible. It's still row for carbon. We'll see. Yeah, exactly. So we'll see. Also, Pesach Bizmani Lishma, if you had in mind Pesach kosher. Shaloi Lishma, you had a wrong carbon in mind possible. Uvashai Maisa Shawan, the rest of it, Pufakek. Lishma, if you had in mind a carbon Pesach possible. But Shaloi Lishma, if you did not have in mind a carbon Pesach kosher. But not how do you know all this? Says the Gemara, Amar Abu Shmuel, the father of Shmuel said, Amar Kra, it says in the Pasuk, the Im min hatzoin karbonoi. If it says in the pasuk, if in the beginning of a chumash, if min hatzoin karbonoi, if from the tzoin, the sheep is your carbon, li zevach shlamim lahashem. Now the carbon shlamim can be anything, it can be a behemoth also. Why say only tzoin? So it's talking about if there's a carbon that you can only do it with tzoin, which is the carbon pesach. You can only do it with a goat or with the lamb. It's only a carbon pesach. What happens? It sometimes turns into a shlamim. When? It's the wrong zman. That's something like they can only use tzoin for, will turn into a shlamim. Says the Gemara, okay. Ema shlamim in midachin. Maybe only if you had in mind a shlamim, okay, then it's the korban pesach and chalamai becomes a shlamim. But if you had in mind a korban chatas, a korban nashim, korban oila, maybe it doesn't work because the pasuk is liz zevach shlamim. Liz zevach, the word liz zevach, it doesn't say iman atchen kabani shlamim. It says lezevach. Zevach means any carbon. The rabbis call zevach. Okay. So let's say like this: if you had in mind a shlamim, it becomes a shlamim. If you had in mind an oila, it should become an oila. Let's say whatever carbon you had in mind, that's what it becomes. Whatever carbon you shechted, let it become like that carbon. If it would read that if you had in mind a shlam, it becomes shlamim, and v'zevach, you had in mind any other carbon, it becomes any other carbon. Kedar, like you just said. Aber hast du dich li zevach shlamim? Now that it says li zevach shlamim, the kol de shachile shlamim level the zevach. No matter what you shechted, what you had in mind, shlamim, it turns into a shlamim. Aim of the maybe you know. Let it say li zevach is a klal. Shlamim is a prat, and what's the name we have a klal prat? Klal prat aim b'chal mashem prat. Let's limit it shlamim in midachin eloy. Maybe using the rules of klal prat. Let's say that only if you had a minor shlamim is kosher, and anything else is possible. Midachin eloy. What it says in the pasuk zevach shlamim la Hashem. Hashem is all encompassing. Any carbon that's la Hashem, how do we call? That's why any carbon you had in mind is good enough. Fred the Gemara, we had the same thing before. Masculine Yaakov and Hapkoid. Haloidomi klala, baslo klala kama. He said, when's the klal part of klala? The second klal is as encompassing as the first one. But here, the second klal is far more expansive. Why? The first one says zevach, only things that require shchita. La Hashem is any carbon you bring to Hashem. It could be a mincha, it could be an oif. An oif is not shchita, an oif is malika. Use your thumb. So therefore, the first klal is marbe zvachim, and only animals, or only thing that requires shchita, and klal basel Hashem. Kol Hashem is like klal basel Hashem. Kol Hashem. I feel loifus. I feel menachas. It's not the same thing. What answers back? The same answer we had before. Rabbi Shmuel, who taught us all of these rules about klal prat, he says you don't need the second klal to be exactly the first klal. He's still called, even though the second one might be more expansive, doesn't matter. It's expansive, so therefore, because we're only medamet to the prat anyway. What are we including? Only what's similar to the prat. It's irrelevant that the second klal is more expansive than the first. Klal prat, you have to get prat. Ma prat mefudesh shalei l'shmei v'kosher. Av kosher shalei l'shmei v'kosher. Okay, it has to be similar to the prat. What do we know about the prat shlamim? It's an animal that you voluntarily donate it. So maybe if you had in mind a chatas, you can't voluntarily donate a chatas. No, so maybe they're not included. So maybe if you had in mind with the current Pesach to be a chatas, this should be possible. Only if you had in mind an oil or a shlamim. If you had in mind a chatas, shouldn't work. Elod, when answer, you're right. Nothing to do with klal prat. The zevach ribuyu means like this. When is a klal prat? You have one word that says b'chol tav and nafshecha, whatever you desire. So it's a klal. No, it's pashna taichin. The pasuk is very inclusive. Then you have a limiting, a boker, and then you have another expansive one. Fine. Over here, it could have said the word shlamim. Why do you even add the word zevach? The Torah is putting it there to be marbe. Nothing to do with klal prat. Klal. The word is extra. If it's extra, it's a ribuy. Not the ribuy means ribuy, it's not to do with that. It's a ribuy. So therefore, we're marbe any animal. The ribuy, emel. So I'm going to ask, fine. So forget klal prat klal. Before you answer me, it has to be similar to the prat, right? Emel called the shachil to have a kavase. Before you have to be similar to the prat, it turns to the shlamim. But now that you tell me it's a ribuy, let us say that whatever animal you had in mind, it should become that animal. If you took a pesach and you had in mind an oila, let it become an oila. You had in mind a chatas, let it be a chatas. Rabbi said, I'll give you a different reason why. You know why? What are we doing? We're taking a carbon Pesach, which is kachim, and pushing it away. We're rejecting it. So what can we replace it with? You can only replace it with another carbon that you can eat.
You can't get oil or something.
Exactly. So you can't do oil because you can't eat it. You can't do a chatas v'ashem because you don't eat it. The Baal Bas doesn't eat it. And therefore can only be shlamim. Talking about but a chatzah can be eaten. We're now saying that we learn out that you can a korban Pesach can be any carbon you had in mind. Good enough is when the word zevach is not klal prat, it's a ribu, it's an extra word, marbe everything. So now we're asking a bazei. Having in mind any carbon you want should be good enough because it's no longer klal prat klal, just a ribu, an extra word. So we answer that no, because logic. If you're going to replace kachim with other kachim, it has to be similar. In what way? That it can be eaten. Okay, so you can't have a mind in oila. It turns into a shlamim. If you had a mind in oila, it turns into a shlamim. What about osham v'chatas? They're also could be eaten. So I ask him, what eladoichin 3-4 on the top? Eladoichin kachim and lechol adam. Korban Pesach can be eaten by anybody. Eitzel kachim lechol adam. If we're going to replace it with a korban shlamim, anybody can eat it. But then kachim lechol adam. Eitzel kachim lechol adam. You want to replace it with osham v'chatas? Only a kohen can eat it. That's not included. Nobody can eat it.
The Pesach
Yeah, but every year you try it to their Pesach. Exactly. Exactly, that's it. And Rabbi Yossi says similar, but he said the word is Rabbi Yossi of Avinam in the same. We're still talking about the same subject. That we're going to replace kachim. You want to know why it's limited to shlamim? Doichin kachim kalim eitzel kachim kalim. A cotton pesach can be eaten all over Yerushalayim. You're going to replace it now with something else. Shlamim, you eat it all over Yerushalayim. The ain doichin kachim kalim eitzel kachim kachim. But you cannot turn it into a carbon oil, a chatas, or nasha. These are all kachim kachim. You can't go up. Maskula. Huh. So now we're going to ask a series of questions. There are other kachim kalim. At least if you, let's say you had in mind, it should be like a bchor. You had in mind, it should be like ma'isa behema. Kachim kalim. Let it be like kachim kalim. So you know, maskula. You of emo. Let us say shachte l'shem ma'isa. You took the carbon pesach. You said the only carbon it becomes a shlamim. Now shlamim has all this dinim. You need nesachim. You have to pour the libations. You need tenufas chazei v'shoik. You have to wave it. What happened? You had in mind ma'isa behema. It's kachim kalim. Let it be ma'isa behema, and you don't have to then do the tenufa. You don't have to have nesachim. Be different in him. Is levin ma'isa l'mayich lo lebayin nesachim. You don't need nesachim or the tenufa. And number one, number two, ulemilka leb below yigol. If you, it says the pasuk, you're not allowed to redeem ma'isa behema, and we learn out it means we learn. You're not allowed to, it means you're not allowed to sell it. You don't have that isa by shlamim. So therefore. Let the din be that it should be ma'aseh b'chalas, because you just said kachim kalim cannot become kachim. But l'chayda it should be kachim kalim. On Makro, we have a meat. It says in the pasuk, "Asidi woman, asidi kodesh." Only this is the only way you can make ma'aser by counting and get number 10 or 9 becomes 10, 11 becomes 10. But you cannot have a mind, a korban pesach and turn it into ma'aser behema. Okay, we're still continuing. Okay, fine. But ema shachti l'shem b'chayr. You took the korban pesach and you had in mind, I want this to be a korban b'chayr. It's a kachim kalim. Let it become a b'chayr. Might have committed for Shlama B'chayr. I'm surprised Gemara doesn't say one enough committed on all these things. The time, how long you eat it for. Shlama 2 days in the night, and B'chayr and all these things is only 1 day in the night. Mais is 1 day in the night. Anyway, said Gemara, Levek B'chayr, L'mai Hilchasa. What's the difference? The loy leboy in the sachin, same thing. You don't need the sachin by B'chayr, number one, and inami or the lace for the koinim. B'chayr you can only give to koinim. Big difference. If you tell me it's shlamim, everybody can eat it. Tell me it's a b'chayr, only a koinim. And your sword of Rabbi Yossi that kachim kalim can become kachim kalim, no, let it become a chayr. So we answer also b'chayr nami. B'chayr has a gzeira shava that we learn b'chayr from Ma'aser. It says v'habarte kol peterechem, and it says that b'cholas asiri. It says chol ma'aser v'getzon asher yaver tachas shava. To make a gzeira shava, talking about Ma'aser, you cannot only. This is the only method of becoming Ma'aser. B'chayr also, this is the only way of becoming a b'chayr. It has to be peterechem. The Ma'aser gomer. Okay, so the third question. Why don't we say? Why don't we say shachtel l'shem t'mura lehevet t'mura? You had in mind t'mura. You're not allowed to swap an animal for another animal, a carbon for another animal. But if you did, hayahu t'mura kodesh. So you had in mind it should be t'mura of whatever the animal is. First of all, you'll get malchus now because you just made it t'mura. Or inami l'meikale, but lo go. Also, you have the issue. You're not allowed to sell it. You're not allowed to redeem. You're not allowed to sell it, which you don't have by shlamim. Omar Mazutra, no. There again, we have a limit. Only it and its exchange. We'll just continue this full part so you ends before the pause. Again, you're telling me kachim kalim can become kachim kalim. There's a carbon taida. And we learned before that taida and shlema, 2 different things. A carbon taida, if you had a minor taida, it'd be like a taida, and mine have kamina. You got to bring 40 chalas. You got to bring the 40 chalas. If it's a shlamim, it's just a shlamim. A taida, you have that. Again, why doesn't the Gemara bring here the time period? Me, that's only day and night. Me, ikamidi, Gemara says, very simple.
Would have been much shorter.
Yeah, exactly. Then right away would be no questions. Whatever, well, at least it'll be the same thing. Me, ikamidi, the Pesach gufa, loy boy lechem, the current Pesach itself doesn't require any additional, loaves. Umoyse boy lechem, but if you swap this original carbon to something else, you need now something additional. But of course you do. A shlamim needs nesachim and current Pesach doesn't. So you see the problem of having additional is not a problem. So what's the wrong with having additional chalas? Or when you swap the shlamim, you need nesachim. So this is what I meant to ask. Is there anything? The said toida. That's your toida. You brought a toida, you lost it, so you brought another one. You set aside toida, you lost, you brought another one, then you found the original. You bring up the original one as a toida as well. but you don't bring the chalas anymore. So the original toida, if you bring it again, you don't bring chalas, but a carbon pesach that becomes a toida, you do bring chalas, klapnisht. Like boy, the moisa toida, that's what the moisa the asylum alma, but a leftover an extra toida from somewhere else from pesach. Boy, lechem doesn't lechem.
And then can't even be public.
Okay, pause for 1 minute. This is the Gemara of the first day of Rosh Hashanah, and we're talking about a carbon Pesach, and we're saying that if you had in mind, if it's after this man of bringing a carbon Pesach, it turns automatically to Shlamim. And how do we know? From the father of Nachman, because it's Shmuel, because he says in the pasuk, "Im min hatzoin karbonai lezevach shlamim," that an animal, this carbon turns into a shlamim. Which carbon? The carbon that comes from tzoin. Which carbon is only bringing tzoin? Is a carbon Pesach. All the carbon you can bring animals and so on. So you want to ask, that's not true. There's another carbon that only comes from tzayin. Carbon Asham. Maskiv Rav the page of Tes Amad Aleph. Masko Rav Yemir Rav Hillel Mai the Meisa Pesach High talking about Pesach. The Meisa Asham maybe about Carbon Asham. Because Asham also you bring only from tzayin. You can't bring a behemoth. So how you know which one is it that it turns? Maybe by Carbon Asham, if you had the wrong thing in mind, it becomes a shlamim. Not by Carbon Pesach. Maybe it's puzzle. Omar Rava, no. Rava says, Omar Kra, it says in Pasik, after it says, if Iman Atzon Kabbanik, it says, then it says, Im Kesevu V'im Eizu, right? It delineates further what sign is. Kesev, the din is so, Eiz, the din is so. Now the Chayda. The Iman Atzon Kabbanik, Zevach Shlamim, it says, Im Min Atzon Kabbanik, Zevach Shlamim. So first of all, Davar Hashave B'chal Atzon. Something that you can bring from any side, from sheep and goats. Asham you can only bring from goats. You don't bring from lambs. Sorry, the other way around. Asham you only bring from sheep, but you don't bring from goats. So therefore, it says minat tzayin is all kinds. So tzayin is a generic term. It includes goats and sheep. So therefore, it can become an asham. Maske, it can be talking about carbon asham. Every time it says min, you say it comes to reduce. But can mean lerabis, and here you tell me by saying minat tzayin, it means all the tzayin. Right, a goat and a sheep, and therefore can be an asham. And we learned so many times. I was on the places that min means, not all the animals. If it was a nirba, if it was, bestiality, or if it was set aside for a muktzah, it can be used. Min always comes to limit, and here you're coming to include all sign. So the Gemara says no. Min also comes to limit, but not in the kind of sign, something else. If the animal is over 2 years old, you cannot bring it. So min is coming to limit it. And it can be talking about a female, only a male. A carbon Pesach can only be a male. Rabbi Chaim Brisker, when you guys used to go to yeshiva, he would give them a whole series of questions to see their IQ. And one of the questions is, if you shechted a carbon Pesach, you found the bemkua inside, what happens to the bemkua? What happens to the baby? Does it become also carbon Pesach or not? Exactly. Can be, because it has to be a male. Maskivla, Rav Chana, he has a brilliant question regarding sukkah. It's too late, we're talking all the time. Maskivla, Rav Chana Bakta. Abchana Bakta asked me, so that's what you're asking me. I want it come to limit other things, but tzayin means all kinds of sheep and goats, and therefore can only be talking about a carbon pesach. Very mother, how can you say the chiksiv high? But my pesach, it's my pesach. It says im. The pasuk says then im. It talks about you're telling me it's not talking about a shlamim here, we're talking about carbon pesach. But then the pasuk says im kesef, and then it says im kesef im eis. If it's a Korban Pesach, we know already that a Korban Pesach can be a Kesef Eis. So it should have just said, we don't even need the words Im Kesef, because that's what a Korban Pesach is. It could have then said, Im Eis. What do you have to say, spell Im Kesef Eis? Sounds like you're talking about a new thing that we haven't talked about before. Talking about Korban Shlom itself, not talking about Korban Pesach here. Im Eis, Meklad, a lot of Moiseh Pesach. See, we're not talking about Moiseh Pesach, because we know already a Pesach being a Kesef. I said, no, it's coming to tell you dinim. Ahum boile, like at the time we learn, Keves. L'rabbis es a pesach la'alya, that a keves has hindquarters and they go on the mizbeach as well. Eiz doesn't have. Kishu oimer im. That's the whole story being psachim there with Rabbi Yehuda Seder, that guy who bragged that he was going to. Yeah, exactly. Kishu oimer, it says im keves l'rabbis to be marbe pesach. So what is it im keves l'rabbis to be marbe? That a pesach she ibra shnasa. that if the Korban Pesach already, a Korban Pesach has to be less than a year old. If it's over a year old, it's already possible for Korban Pesach. And Ushlamim Haboim Machmas Pesach L'chol Mitzvah Shlamim. That is, and the pasuk here is coming to tell you that if a Korban Pesach has been disqualified, for example, it's over a year old, it turns into a Shlamim, and it has all the dinim of Shlamim. The pasuk Im Keves Im Eis to tell you that has all the dinim. What Nesachim, Shitat, and you need smicha, you have to press your hand. Unesachim Utruvas Chazei B'Shaik. Kishoimer Im Eis, and then why is it Im Eis? Okay, Im Keves tell you that has all the, that if the Pesach is possible, it's like a Shlamim, and it has all the dinim. What do you mean Im Eis? Hifsika Inyan, it interrupts what he's teaching you. Teach you another thing. Limit ala Eis, Shayla to an alya, that Eis does not require the alya. That's what you say to sentence. For the Gemara, so you'll tell me now a whole new pasuk from Im Keves Im Eis. But yet the father of Shmuel learned it from the other pasuk. Imin had son Kabban is ever Shlamim. It's different pasuk altogether. That something that comes from sheep turns into a Shlamim. It's a different pasuk. Number two. Number three, we have another pasuk. There's another pasuk actually. So we had it before as well. He's a third pasuk. How do you know the leftover pesach on the shlamim? That what? That you shech the pesach to the bakar. We know that pesach cannot be a bakar, can be animals. But so why does it say bakar? That means it was that the korban pesach turns into another carbon, where that carbon can be made from tzayin or bakar, shlamim. To another carbon which can be used for, you can use bakar for. Or my new to match shlamim. We have three psukim to tell you that the leftover pesach becomes a shlamim. I need three psukim. Each one adds another chiddush. First one. The first one is when the carbon is tied, totally no longer shaykh to Pesach. For example, la'avras mana ve'ibrishnasi has two deficiencies. First of all, it's already after Pesach, after the first Erev of Pesach. Number one. Number two, it's over a year old. What can you do with it? Nothing. But if we would have thought, if let's say it's less than a year old and you missed the Erev Pesach, maybe you can't make a shlam. You got to wait till Pesach Sheni and use it for Pesach Sheni. So now we have another pasuk. Even though it's still within the year, since Lepoil you missed the window, now it turns into shlamim. And the chad and the other one, and you can't use it again. Same carbon. Once you set it aside for this first Pesach, it belongs for Pesach. And then the chad, so okay, we would have thought fine. In both of them, you missed the window. What about if it's prior to Pesach? It was designated Pesach prior, and so maybe, and you had in mind the wrong carbon, maybe then it's bikosha. You should know that it turns into shlamim. We don't thought maybe it's possible, whatever, it turns into shlamim. With tzrich, you need all three. Because I would thought, hey, completely removed from Pesach, fine. Maybe you should use the sheni. Because it's not shy Pesach at all. And therefore it's no longer used for Pesach and it becomes shlamim. Maybe taki can still use it for Pesach. Therefore you need it. Says the Gemara, Rab comes along and said the name of Mavoy, the following din. Chatas. We had before that if you shech the chatas chaylev for a chatas dam, if you shechted a chatas for another chatas, it's good enough. It's not called shini kodesh because it's still a chatas. If you shechted a chatas, you had a mind an oiler, that's called shini kodesh. When it comes to changing the owner, it's exactly the opposite. If you had in mind another person who brings a chatas, it's a shini bailim because he's shaykh to the carbon chatas, but it's the wrong person. If you had in mind a person who's bringing carbon oiler, it's not shini bailim because he's not shaykh to the carbon at all. Exactly the opposite. So comes along and makes the following ambiguous statement that if you shechted a chatas and you had in mind, this is going to be l'shum chatas nachshen, the same kind of chatas that Nachshon brought. The very first carbon chatas we have in the Torah is Nachshon ben Amenodah by Chanukas HaMishkan. He was the first nasi who brought it, and this is the chatas of Nachshon. Shaded is kosher. And how do I know? The Amakra Zeis Torah is a chatas. I don't care what chatas you had in mind. All as long as you had a chatas in mind, is good enough. Torah achad l'chachatois. Any chatas you had in mind, is good enough. Even Torah is Nachshon. Now we're going to find out that the korban chatas of Nachshon is different than a normal korban chatas. There's no aveda. What aveda did he do? There's no any aveda. It's really a carbon oiler. We call it chatas, but really a carbon oiler. And that
bring a kapara.
Kapara for what?
No, I'm saying the person who brings it.
Oh yeah, you brought a chatas chaylev, and you had in mind it should be chatas Nachshon. Because the name chatas is the same, it's good enough, and that's a chiddush. Even though Nachshon was really an oil different. It's not called shinu kodesh. But we'll soon analyze all this and we're going to change all this. Yosef Rav sat to come Hashmaiti repeated this to you. Eisvei Rav Mishasha asked Rav a question. Rav Shimon says that Rav Shimon has a machlekes with Chachamim when it comes to a carbon mincha. According to Chachamim, a carbon mincha, if you had the wrong mincha in mind, it puzzles the mincha. Is shini kodesh. Rabbi Shimon says by mincha it's not shini kodesh. You know why? Because action speaks louder than words. There are different kinds of menachas, and each one is prepared in a different way. A shallow pan, a deep pan, with oil, without oil smeared on top, or you mixed in, scramble it in. Because each mincha, the maisa, speaks for itself. I don't care what you had in mind. You can have in mind whatever you want. You can have in mind Amakeshes, and Lapoil. Your actions speak louder than words. Chachamim disagree. They say that the stage of machshava, you're already past it. It's too late. But they only argue about mincha. But when it comes to all other kabbanas, everyone agrees you had the wrong carbon in mind. It's possible. Now here we have within mincha itself. It's all within mincha, and yet the Chacham holds possible. So first of all, Chacham hold of carbon is possible. Shimon is made, but comes to the normal kabbanas, you had a different carbon in mind, even though it's similar. It's possible. What's going on here? Then the Gemara. It says, if you did the kmitza not having in mind the right carbon shadis. But and it's effective. Why? We can't compare mincha to a carbon. Let's say you claim a machlis is the flat frying pan, and you cut it. You bake it, then you cut it in pieces, and you put it into oil, shallow pan. And you had in mind machesh is the deep pan, the one that bubbles and makes noises when it goes up and down. We'll learn all about the menachas. Is maaseh mechisnela, the activities tell us which carbon it is. Doesn't matter what you thought. Shehi machvas, that it's a machvas. Who cares what you thought? Harevu l'shem blula, a dry one with no oil on it, and you had in mind for the mincha that has oil in it. It's mixed in. Who cares what your machshava is? Ma'aseh trumps machshava. But Zevachim, doesn't matter what carbon it is, the shchita is the same. Shchita achas the kulam. Kabbalah achas the kulam, the same activity, zik achas the kulam. So if you had the wrong thought, it makes color the whole thing. So Taima, we're asking not only for the Chacham, even for Rab Shimon. Taima, the Ma'aseh Mechichin. Only because the activities trumps the machshava. Ha'ei Ma'aseh Mechichin loy. Why? Lema, let us say, Zois Teiras HaMincha, Teiras achas, L'cham Menachas, or Menachas should be kosher. Let's go back to Rav. This is what the Rav says. Chatas chelim and chatas dam are mamish the same. So we're not asking a kasha on that. That we learned that Rav said before. If you had in mind chatas dam, if you had in mind when you did a chat of treva when Daf Tesla Beis in the middle of the page, if you had in mind a chatas, let's say of treva fats, and you a chat of blood, and really you had treva fats, it's so similar that it's not called you had in mind the wrong carbon. But here we're talking about where you had to make a different carbon. You had to mind a different kind of a chatas, like a chatas of nachshin. The chatas of nachshin was not really a chatas. It's more, there's no avera there to atone for. Or the chatas of a nazir, the chatas of mitzvah, there's no real avera to atone for. That's a different kind of a chatas. And it seems that you said that all chatas are good. I don't care what kind of chatas you have in mind, even like nachshin. Clear from here that if you have a carbon in mind that's very different, even though it has the same name, it doesn't work. So you must say you're right. We misunderstood what Rav said. Amar Elid Marhaki, but this is what Rav said. Amar Ramash Ben Mavoig. The Rav said name Mavoig. Rashi said Shem Chacham, some Chacham. Chatas sheshachta Amar. This is what you had. We're not talking about you changed the animal. You changed the person. You said Chatas sheshachta. I'm shechting this Chatas. Amanash is Chapa Bonachshin. The nachshin should be atoned for. Kshay is kosher. Why is it kosher? He's the wrong person because he passed away already. And remember, we said before that the only time that it ruins the carbon is he had someone else in mind who's alive. And because he passed away, it doesn't ruin the carbon. Ain't kapara leleisim. And because there's no kapara once he passed away. Belema, someone says, why talk about nachshin? Belema, that was a general rule. Meis ba'alma. Just say that if you had in mind somebody who passed away already, it doesn't ruin the carbon. Why talk about nachshin? Hakamashon, so right now wants to say, Dafke nachshin because he passed away. Kamash time with the mess because Nachshon passed away. If Nachshon would have been alive, then what? It would be possible. Why would it be possible? Because even though his carbon is different because it's not a avera there, it's just an oiler. It's like an oiler, but because it's called chatas, it's similar enough that you ruin the carbon, you have the wrong person in mind. So because it's considered similar, that chatas. If been a living person doing the nachshin, psula. What do you mean possible? For example, chatas nazir, chatas nazir. It's called a chatas, even though it's not really a sin offering. What are they to do? Even though we're having more nazir, that Rab Shimon says that's why it's called a chatas because you whatever is it's an aveira becoming a nazir, and so on. Or mitzvah because there's lashon hara. There's a little bit of an aveira there. But nevertheless, we don't treat it like an Aveda. It's not like a normal Aveda. So even so, because it's called Chatas, It's enough to ruin your carbon. Hani oilers knew. That's what he's saying here. Why should it ruin the carbon? Hani oilers knew. The mamish a carbon oiler. It's not a chata. There's no sin whatsoever. It's an oiler. Why? We said before that if you did a chata that had in mind a person who's doing an oiler, it does not ruin the carbon. So why should somebody like Nachshon ruin the carbon? Was he right? We're going to swap it all around. It's amazing how we start out and we come to a totally opposite thing. If you say that I'm shechting a chatas on somebody who is chai v'chat nachshon, in other words, I'm not talking about a person anymore. I'm talking about the animal. Sheda, you should know that it's kosher. Why? Chatas not. Sorry, I'm talking about a person. I'm having in mind another person. But what carbon did the other person do? Like nachshon. So it's kosher because it's not a carbon chatas. It's not a carbon chatas. No, it's like this. When it comes to changing the person, the owner of the animal, it's only possible if that person is chai a similar carbon to what you're bringing, but it's the wrong person.
What's the mice of this carbon? How are you doing it?
You're doing it's a carbon chatas you have to bring for your avera. And then, for whatever reason, the Kohen got up there and said, "I'm doing it for people for a carbon like nachshon," which is not really a chatas, even though it's called a chatas, it's mamash and oila. Therefore, it does not, and I'm doing it for another person. I'm doing it for this person, for another person who is bringing a carbon. It doesn't ruin the carbon. It does not ruin the carbon because it's not the same carbon. It's a carbon oila. Sheda. Why? Because chatas nachshon oili. That's one version. The others say, so the first version is we're talking about you change the owner. You change the person. The second version is talking about the animal itself. You shechted the carbon itself and you had a different carbon in mind. I want this to be like the carbon chatz of nachshon. Psul is possible. It is possible. Why? Chatz is nachshon oily because it's a different carbon. It's an oila. And what did we say before? By a chatz, if he had in mind, when it comes to the animals, the wrong carbon is possible. If you had in mind the same animal, a chatas, then it'll be, even though it's a different chatas, it'll be kosher. So the Gemara said, why talk about nachshon? But let me just say straight out, chatas nazir, chatas mitzayda. Just say a chatas nazir and a chatas mitzayda, which is not for navera. And I had that in mind. It ruins the carbon because it's a different carbon altogether. Somebody right. Iker chatas nakat. We want to go back to the very first carbon chatas ever brought in the Torah, and the first chatas was nachshon by another by Chanukas HaMishkan. Amar Rav says Rav, chatas chaylev sheshachta l'shem chatas dam. A chatas chaylev, you ate tray for fats, you have to bring carbon chatas, and you shechted having in mind a chatas for blood, or dam l'shem chatas v'gechavim, or you have a chatas for blood, and you had in mind I'm doing it for a sin of avodah zarah. Shade, it's all kosher. Why? Because it's a similar. They're all chatas. That's similar. Remember, when it comes to changing an animal, if it's the same carbon, it's not a problem. Oh, but if you have in mind shem chatas nazir, shem chatas mitzayda, it's possible. Why? Because it's different carbon, even though it's a chatas, because hani oilers, they're oilers. So boy, Rav asked the question. Chatas chaylev. What about if you did a chatas chaylev? Yeah, you're chayiv a chatas for 8 trans fats, but you had in mind an avera which requires a carbon oil v'yared. It's a chatas. It's not like a no sin. You did a sin over there, but the chatas is a different kind of chatas. Depending on what you can afford. Do we say it's a similar carbon or not? And I'm only asking regarding tumas mikdashah. Regarding tumah of a shvuah that you made, I'm not asking why. There's no kares there. It's a different carbon altogether. But tumas mikdash kedashah, if you did it deliberately, what's your punishment? Kares. It's just like any other chatas. The only difference is if you did a b'shegi, the kind of animal you bring or the kind of carbon you bring is different. Here it depends on your socioeconomic level. So my question is, if you had a mind to make kedashah, do we say kares kamaisa? It's similar to all of that. This is kares. Or do we say ein kavua kamaisa? Do we say since it's not a fixed carbon, maybe it's different? Is Abacha Brei the Rava? It seems that Rava's son Abacha. Masni, he learned Kula Psula. He said that what they're all possible. It's a different carbon, and therefore it's possible. My timer, why? It says V'shachat, going back to the possible we learned before. V'shachat oisa lechat pas l'shem oisachat has to be mamish the same. Here it's different. It's a different kind of a carbon altogether. You can bring a bird, you can bring flower, different. Boy, how are you going to understand your father's? If it says father, how are you going to understand his boy then? It's clear that it's all us. What's his question? Amala, he said, you understood the question was you changed the animal. I understood Bishina Baila Masila. I understood that the Rabba's question was you had in mind another person who happens to be bringing a carbon oil for Tumas Migdash Kedashav. Is it considered? Because remember, there, if it's the same carbon, you ruin the carbon. If it's a different carbon, if you're talking about changing the person, the owner, it doesn't ruin the carbon. How do we view Tumas Midrash Kedasha? Because on one hand it's Karis, so it's a similar carbon, it should ruin the carbon, it's the wrong person. On the other hand, it's a different carbon altogether, right? You can bring a bird, so you can bring flour. So maybe it doesn't ruin the carbon. That was his question. And I'm but what I'm saying before is if you change the carbon itself, you change the name of the carbon. It's possible because it's not the same. Because this is the question. Amar Rava says, Rava, this is how I learned the whole thing. Rava says, "Chatas chaylev sheshachta mishim b'chayiv chatas dam." If you shechted a chatas chaylev, had in mind another person who's chayiv a different kind of a chatas, but for blood, the chatas yichom possible. Why? Because it's similar chayiv. Mishim b'chayiv chatas nazir chatas mitzayid. If you had in mind someone who's chayiv a nazir, it's kashiv because that's a different carbon altogether. That's an oila. Or boila hachi. This is the question. If you had in mind a person who's chayiv a carbon for entering the base of Mikdash. Now, we say Kaddish Kamais, it's similar enough, it's Kaddish, and therefore it ruins the carbon. Because on the same Teku. Okay, we'll stop over here and we'll continue tomorrow. So that's a new sugya now, so we'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah.
Tomorrow.
Sorry, not tomorrow. We'll continue Mitzvah Yom Tif at 7:45.
One block.
Yeah, one block. Way back to normal. It's a new sugya. It's a new sugya. Okay, have a good day, everybody. And good ben shiur, and all our tefillah should be in the skabel. Go to the Kisei HaKavod.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Does the Gemara really differentiate some of these things as to whether the owner of the korban is doing the wrong thing or thinking of the wrong thing, as opposed to when the kohen thinks the wrong thing?
All of it depends. This is talking about the kohen himself. In fact, we had in Gemara Bava Kama a discussion. If the kohen, also in Gittin, if a kohen has to pay because he just ruined your animal, forcing you to bring another animal, it's the kohen, the one who's doing the activities.
Correct.
The one who's doing the activities, the one who's doing shechting, the one who's doing the sprinkling of the blood.
Yes,
it's the kohen who ruins it.
So the person bringing it, if he's bringing a korban and he's had totally in mind, I mean, he had it right, but then he got it wrong. It doesn't really matter as long as the kohen's doing it.
Yeah, it's the kohen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, one who's doing it. There's a question because if we say hezek shein and nikolosh hezek, means if it's not a visible damage, then we had a machlekes in Rav Shmuel, but according to the halacha, it's not a hezek from the Torah because hezek has to be visible. The Rabbanan just penalize you, so you shouldn't continue doing this all the time. Yeah. And then we talk about the kohen who goes ahead and ruins. For example, the kohen did pigul. You know what happens then? Does he have to reimburse you or not? But
and then the other thing is, does the kohen really, with all the noise and so on going on in the base of Mikdash, does the kohen call out this sacrifice is for so and so? Who's
the machlekes and the rishonim whether the kohen has to actually verbalize it or just his thought process enough to ruin the carbon. Rashi, in a few places, we even mentioned a taste a few days ago that says, and that I talked about already somewhere else, that you actually, according to Rashi, you have to say it. You have to bring it into the world of into our tangible world. And speaking in a way is tangible, even though it's not really tangible, but it's tangible. Other people can hear it outside of yourself. Thought process is nothing. Others disagree and they say just thinking alone is enough to ruin the whole thing.
So who's going to be?
And the kohen then has to confess. Hey, we're talking about an honest person. We're talking about b'shayga. He did it by mistake. He said, "Oi, I had the guy before. He told me it's an oil, and I forgot to know, and I was doing it. I was pell mell, and like you just said, it was noisy, and I lost track, and I did because they worked all day, especially certain busy periods."
That's right, and also the person bringing the korban wasn't after they'd put their hand on it. How close were they to the action?
That's the shpita. Yeah, they stand right outside, and outside, as Israel, and they put their hand on it. The smicha is done before you shecht the animal. Or the animals outside, they put their hand with all the force, and then they bring it in and they shecht. Some animals have to be shechted in the north side of the mizbeach. We'll learn later.
So it may not be heard what the kohen's saying. That could be a long way away.
Other kohen heard.
So
and they'll come out. They'll come out. And we're talking about a person who did it by mistake. We're not talking about deliberate. He did it by mistake. No. So he'll come out and tell you the truth.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good Yom Tif.
Thank you. Yes, you too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.